let's do that. Alrighty. As we kind of get ready to go today, um, assuming you can hear me, let's just go over that real fast just to make sure that it's all working. Looks like everything is good on my end. You guys let me know. If something's wrong, let me know. But in the comments, if you would like to ask a question, feel free to ask it at any time. Perfectly fine for you guys to throw questions up. You don't have to wait for me to open it up to questions. If you have something, throw it up there, and we'll go from whatever your questions happen to be. All right, good. Looks like we're good. All right. So yeah, if you have any questions, don't feel like you gotta wait until like the middle or end or whatever of the video. Ask away. I will get to them as I have either the train of thought to get to them or something like that. So don't feel like you gotta wait until a specific time for me to say like, hey, ask questions. If you want to like the video, go ahead. You don't have to. If you want to share it out, you can. That's fine too. But today, the main objective, as the title would suggest, we are going to talk about World War II, specifically the start and end, and we're going to look at specific events that happened throughout World War II. And there's a little bit of an audio clip that I'm going to play in a little bit here, and we're going to talk about what's going on in the audio clip because the video and the speech that it's referring to or that it's using and adapting for drama, for movies. It's one of the most impactful speeches for World War II, given by Winston Churchill. So we're going to talk a little bit about World War II generally, then we're going to kind of go into a few specifics as to effectively why this was such a victory for the Allies, why the Axis powers at the end of the day ended up losing, specifically Germany, but the Axis powers generally, why did they end up losing? Is it just dumb luck? Is it good generalship? Is it a little bit of both? What is the X factor, as it were? Why did this side win and this side lose? So we're going to be looking at that. That's mainly what your question for the week pertains to. So the objective today is to kind of give you guys all the tools to kind of answer that question if you don't already have that. So we're going to be looking at the war. We're going to look at the start of the war. We're going to look at some of the events that lead up throughout the war and kind of trickle in there. Some of the major players. We're going to talk a little bit more about Hitler. We'll talk about Churchill and his rise to fame and power. We'll talk about George Patton from the U.S. Army. We'll talk about Eisenhower. We'll try to get into D-Day and some of the other aspects of the war. But it's a lot to go over in one video, one day. So let's get right into it, right? All right. So World War II, we ended up last week, we kind of like got up to the war beginning, and that was mainly dealt with appeasement, right? We talked on Monday, well, the Monday's video that was posted on Tuesday. We talked about the concept of the Holocaust that happens within World War II, but it's kind of its separate thing altogether. But I kind of talked about that almost out of sequence because I wanted to give that its own day because of the importance of that event. So with World War II, we have the start of the war kind of being where you have Hitler. He's been gobbling up pieces of territory slowly, and France and England, they've just not really wanted to engage in a war. And because of that, he kind of used their fears and their misgivings to kind of get what he wanted. He knew they didn't want to fight, and because he knew that, he was just going to take. But he didn't take all at once. He took it slowly, one piece at a time, and they kept giving it to him. Well, then eventually he ends up taking Poland, him and Stalin. They come to an agreement. Stalin takes the east half. Germany will take the west half, and they'll split Poland down the middle. and everyone wins. And that was more or less the final straw for England and France after this particular peace, because Hitler promised that he would not take any more territory and all this other stuff. Basically, France and Great Britain had no choice. They had to react in some particular way, and war is the unfortunate eventuality of what Hitler was doing. That's just the unfortunate thing about all of this, is that there wasn't really another option that Hitler or that someone had to engage Hitler in. He was taking whatever he wanted, and they had to stop him, and war is going to be the result. So let's look at what's going on. So in 1940, or by 1940 rather, Germany had conquered quite a bit of territory after Poland. I mean, they conquered Poland, they conquered Denmark, they conquered pieces of Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. Like it's a bad deal for World War II. The speed in which Germany is able to do most of what they do between 1939 and 1942 in the World Wars, there is a massive amount of success for the Germans and their Axis powers generally. With World War II and all wars, really, we have a term that we use that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense unless you understand what we're talking about contextually. And that is something called a theater of war. Theater of war is just more or less a location or an area of the war. So, for instance, the Pacific Theater is going to be the area of the Pacific Ocean, specifically around Japan and the island chains in the Pacific. That's the Pacific Theater of war, the area that we would focus on. If you kind of drew a big circle of influence in that area, that would be what you would target and talk about. And then you have the European theater of war. And there are other theaters of war within World War II, but these are the two main ones that we're going to be kind of dissecting and talking about. This is where most of the action happens. Now, while the Pacific theater does have quite a bit of importance for the war generally, we are not going to touch on that as much in this particular segment. Not because I don't feel it's important, but because that's mainly what U.S. history is going to center on and target. We're going to look at a couple of things within the Pacific Theater, but we're going to mainly focus on the European theater of war and how Germany is reacting to the war, how France and Britain and what have you, how they're all kind of playing into this massive war, as well as Italy and some of the others. So that's what we're going to be doing for the next little bit here. I'm not really sure how long this video is. It might go a little longer than I would normally like, just because of the video itself being trying to get the entire war done in one kind of sitting. So we're gonna do our best to get this done, but let's get rocking and rolling. All right, so like I said, theaters of war, think of just like the areas of Europe as that sector of the war that is the theater of war. And this is also part of like North Africa. So Libya, Egypt, that little section of North Africa, that would also be in part of the theater of war within Europe, just because it's kind of close by. They kind of lump them in together. So that's what we're talking about. The Axis powers and the Allied powers. We talked a little bit about this already, but the Axis powers, they are going to be the reformed Central Powers led by Germany. We're going to see Italy join the mix, and then we're going to also see Japan kind of jump in there. And then the Allied powers, they're going to have a couple of people that are together always. That is the British and the French. So Britain and France, obviously. And then we're going to see Russia kind of go back and forth, whether they are or aren't, even though previously they were in the Allied powers in World War I. And then we're going to see eventually the United States join the war on the side of the Allied powers as well. So there are going to be some different time periods, but for the most part, you can think of it as within the European theater, think of it as England and Great Britain versus Italy and Germany. If you just kind of summed it up as those two kind of 2-on-2 rivalries, that's a good place to start. There's a lot of connective tissue to kind of get in there, but if you just think of it in that context, it should be fairly straightforward for you. So, how does Germany achieve military success early on? Well, I'm sure that a lot of you already kind of know this term and have heard of it before. Um, but the term that's used uh, with Germany's successful military campaign early on is something called the Blitzkrieg. That just refers to something basically in German that refers to lightning war or fast assault. They use a combined force of tanks, artillery, and then air raids. One of the things that changes from World War One to World War Two is planes are now going to be used offensively, not just for reconnaissance and information gathering, or not mainly for that. They're going to be used for bombers. They're still going to be used for information, but they're going to also be used to attack the area of the ground. So let's kind of go through and kind of get to where we need to. Let's see here. All right. So one of the things that was extremely painful for the World War, in particular World War II, was the almost non-merciful, if any, if there ever was, a war without rules. Meaning, it didn't matter how you killed people. If you were on one side or the other, just you needed to win. You needed to kill the other side, and that ended up being something that we started to deal with as a gigantic problem. Instead of using trenches, Germany is going to be basically going to try to outrun people. They're going to use speed, mobility. They're going to use modular units. They're going to start to use their tactics that they have developed to effectively just outplay everybody. They're going to use all of their information that they've learned, and they're going to say, well, if you can't outrun our tanks, we're going to be able to get to your areas of influence like your capital cities. So if we can just outrun you, then we don't have to really fight you where you want us to fight. And then when we decide to throw down, we're choosing the battleground at that point. So we do see Germany take a little bit of an approach of trying to change the parameters of fighting. Whereas before, you would kind of almost have like agreed upon areas where people are going to come together and they're going to fight. It's not so much like the Revolutionary War or some of the older like musket-driven wars where you like literally have people stand in lines and they would fire guns at each other and then reload, and everyone's basically just point blank shooting each other. It's not that, but it's not terribly far off from that, or at least it wasn't. And Germany said, well, why? Why do we have to do that? Why do we have to get entrenched and be in trenches? Why can't we just use mobility and technology to force them out of position? They want to fight us here. Let's not let them do that. Let's let them or make them fight us when we have an advantage somewhere else, when they aren't able to set up. And that's what really is going to be the difference maker early on for Germany, is that they are not allowing their enemies to really set up and defend because they're not giving them any real ability to kind of hunker down and get into a military position. They're basically forcing them once they set up to move and relocate, and then they're always kind of on the defensive and are never really kind of where they want to be. So obviously we have this war. It's going in like crazy. The French are the first ones that are really going to be hindered by this in the sense of the Allied powers, because they are the only one of the two that's actually part of mainland Europe. If you recall from geography, Great Britain or England is an island. So France is right next to Germany, which means that when Germany decides to attack, they're the most likely of targets. France had built up something called the Maginot Line, which is effectively a gigantic fort across part of the border of France. Has guns, cannons, the whole nine. It's a very impressive fortification, and Germany decides we're just going to go around that. Similar to how they went through Belgium, or they went through Belgium through World War One. They're going to do that same thing and go straight for an area of northern France. You may have seen a movie about this actually called Dunkirk, and it's talking about Operation Dynamo. Operation Dynamo is the evacuation of about 330,000 Allied soldiers at Dunkirk due to what was going on with the German advanced force, where they were basically pushing up against the French border um, fairly heavily, and there wasn't really a good Allied presence to be able to defend. So we have the Battle of France. We have the the quick surrender of France uh, that ends up happening because Germany effectively just beats them at every point. They are able to suppress the French forces where they do encounter them. They're able to get around the French forces and send another group while they're engaged with the French military. They're able to send another military force of tanks and other armor all the way to Paris. The goal for that was to be able to suppress uh, the governing body of France. If all your leaders are in one spot, mainly the capital, and we're able to get to the capital, we can quickly eliminate the ability for your government to um, act in any particular way, simply because we're going to take control. And that's effectively what ends up going down. We start to see um, cracks in the armor of the Axis powers, though. As Germany is becoming this juggernaut of military skill, as they are taking out territories along the way, like Denmark and the Netherlands and what have you, Poland too, as they're taking up all of these places, and they're showing how successful their tactics are. Mussolini, the Italian fascist, the one that was the elder statesman of the two, that was like kind of like the guy that was kind of grooming Hitler of how to be a fascist to a point. Um, he starts to get a little bit of that green eyed envy, and he goes, "Huh." He's doing stuff that I wanted to do. Because remember, Mussolini's whole goal, if you don't recall this from the video before, Mussolini's whole goal was he wanted to bring back the concept of the glory of Rome. Like he really wanted to have that notoriety again within the Italian people, as we are like our ancestors, the Romans. We're able to have an empire like Caesar and all of these other greats that are part of our history. That's what we want to emulate. And he sees Hitler doing just that, and he's going to be really envious. And he's going to look at this and say, this is easy for Hitler. This is like, he's not even making this look at all difficult. How am I supposed to rack up? What do I bring to this mix if I'm not this military tactician? Mussolini is going to target areas like Egypt. He's going to target the Suez Canal, oil fields of the Middle East. He's going to be looking at wherever he thinks he can kind of build a militaristic empire and kind of absorb things. That's what's going to basically be on Mussolini's mind. So we have some cracks because of Mussolini's kind of envy and what's going on. So what ends up happening here? Well, Mussolini, like I said, he does invade uh, in um, in Egypt, but the British control Egypt. The British have an army in Egypt, and they also have the nationals of that area. Um, they are going to push back against Mussolini, and uh, he is going to basically be stuck in a really, really, really bad situation. Uh, in December 1940, the British forces are going to basically push up against the Italian invading force. And then we're going to see by February of 1941, just a few months later, the British forces are going to sweep over about 500 miles of North Africa, and they're going to capture 130,000 Italian troops, or right around there. Numbers might be a little off here, but about 130,000 troops. That's the general number that they give us. That Mussolini's forces are going to be captured, and Adolf Hitler is going to look at this as something that he has to effectively go and save, because he can't have one of his allies be this incompetent or be viewed as this incompetent, because if it is, it's going to be looked at as this is the weak link of the two, and all we have to do is make sure we're fighting the Italians versus the Germans, and it ends up being a very, very problematic issue for Hitler. So Hitler decides he's going to send his most capable tank commander. His name is Erwin Rommel. He has a nickname called the Desert Fox, and this guy, General Erwin Rommel, he is going to be the literal expert on tank warfare. And when I mean the literal expert, I mean he literally wrote a book talking about the ways in which tank warfare should be conducted, how to lead a tank battalion, how to lead tanks in the field, what are the common ways to maneuver tanks, how do you do certain particular maneuvers. All of this is written down in his memoir several years before. And you might be asking, well, why is that relevant? Why is it relevant that this guy has a book, he's as respected as he is, and he literally wrote the textbook on how to use tank warfare? And I'll let you think about this for a moment. What happens if you're the person that wrote the book and someone reads your book? And in comes George Patton, General Patton of the military of the Americans. Now, eventually, we're going to see the Americans enter the war. It's not going to be quite this early on, but Patton is going to have an encounter with the Desert Fox, and the encounter will go very, very well for Patton and not so well for Rommel, simply because he knows everything Rommel is going to do, because he literally read the book on what Rommel says is perfect for, tank warfare. All right, I know I'm jumping around a lot, so that's what's going on at the moment. Rommel, he has saved the day. He goes down to Egypt, or that general area of the world. He is going to basically push back the British that's kind of been overtaking the Italians, and he's going to save the Italian forces. All right, so this would be one of the times that Mussolini is almost going to be a liability, and that's going to be something that's going to be in Hitler's mind going forward. Mussolini is going to bite off more than he can chew quite a few times, and it's always going to be under Hitler's kind of mind of, why do I have this guy around if he's always going to be useless, or it's always going to be something that I have to bail him out constantly. So we talked about appeasement. We talked about Chamberlain was the leader of Britain at the time. He's the one that Hitler pinky swore that he would totally act like a good person and never take any more territory. And then a few months later, Hitler took it anyway. Drove everyone into war. Well, Chamberlain, due to that, he is going to resign, and we're going to see another man become the defense. He went from defense minister, or effectively the Secretary of Defense for the United States, to the Prime Minister of England, and his name is Winston Churchill. He earned a lot of his military prowess in World War I. He was a young lieutenant in World War I, and a couple of decades later, he's now in a position of authority for World War II. So, what's important about Winston Churchill? Well, first of all, he is not a politician, not in the same way that some of the others were. He is a politician, but he's not a politician without military experience, which is a very different kind of politician when it comes to a war. He understands that the cost of war is going to be human lives. He understands a lot of this, and he is going to be the one that's influential to organize and help orchestrate and support Operation Dynamo, which is, like I said, the evacuation of about 330 or so thousand Allied soldiers from the coast of France from Dunkirk and back to Britain. And we're going to see something that is called the Battle of Britain. And the Battle of Britain is a very, very, very rough scenario for the British people. In 1940, the British people were in fear of one specific event going down. That is, they were afraid that they would have to deal with Germany in the streets of Britain. And it was all that they could to defend against something like this. And Germany, for all its misgivings, they understood that to fight in Great Britain, to fight in England, would be very difficult as a land invasion. The English Navy is extremely impressive. They have done quite well, and they were going to have to do something to be able to make it possible. So the Battle of Britain, or the thing that we refer to as the Battle of Britain, is a massive bombing campaign that is going to target the British Air Force, and it's going to target areas of influence. It's going to target other aspects of military precision within Great Britain. The hope and the thought process is that if they are able to destroy enough military equipment, they will get England to simply give up. Like, that we don't have the ability to fight, therefore we don't have a chance to win. Let's just surrender so we don't have to go through more pain and suffering. That was the hope. Now, there are some very specific things that happen with this, but the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, they're going to shoot down basically most of the Royal Air Force planes within the first few weeks. They are going to dominate the air, and part of that is simply because they are better they are much better pilots because they have been getting experience doing just this. They had helped out in other areas that were going through like some kind of turmoil earlier on in the later 30s, like Spain. They had been using their air power to kind of piggyback on the Blitzkrieg with land forces in Poland and Denmark and some other areas. So the German Air Force was very, very good at what they were doing. And while the British forces were not bad, they were not combat tested in the same way. So we're going to see the British Air Force go through heavy, heavy losses. But we're going to see something that's probably the most amazing of all of the things that goes down. The British Air Force, they are going to effectively, they're going to have a resurgence. They're going to fight back. They're going to break the codes for the Air Force, and they're going to set traps, and they're going to dominate. At least in one particular instance, they're going to dominate the aerial battle. Now, while this is going on, and what I mean by that is they're going to show that the British forces are not completely down and out, and that the Germans can be beaten. At this point, the Germans were, completely undefeated. They had never lost in the air, so no one started to think that, like, it's almost like if you see a basketball team that is just lights out crazy good, and you're like, yeah, okay, well, they should win. They are just better than everyone that they play. And then someone plays them and you're like, oh, so they don't win every single game. They can actually lose if they have a bad day. That's kind of what this kind of reminds me of, is that they're going to be shown as they can actually have this possibility of losing. So Winston Churchill, he is going to be in the House of Parliament, and it's one of the most impressive and important speeches that's given during the Battle of Britain, or right before the Battle of Britain, as as they've been sustaining losses. Areas of Great Britain had been attacked. They understand that they have a lot of massive problems that they have to deal with, and Winston Churchill is going to give a speech inside the House of Parliament. Now, when he gives the speech, it's obviously not going to have the same like musical accompaniment that the clip that I'm about to let you listen to has. But there's a couple of spots that I'm going to pause, and we're going to talk about what he's saying and who he's saying it to and what matters within it, so we kind of get the general overview and the context. But he is a savvy guy, trying to effectively play on the emotions of people. So let's take a listen to Winston Churchill. Let's take a listen to his speech in Parliament. And if for whatever reason, I'm going to have it kind of like split screen on my end. So if for whatever reason it's not showing up or you can't hear it, please let me know sooner rather than later so I can see if I can fix it. But I'm hoping that it just works. I'm hoping that we can get it working. So without further ado, let us play. The audio clip.
To the question of invasion, I would observe that there has never been a period in all these long centuries of which we boast when an absolute guarantee against invasion could have been given to our people. But I have myself full confidence that if all do their duty, if nothing is neglected, and the best arrangements are made as they are being made, we shall prove ourselves once more able to defend our island home, to ride out the storm of war, and to outlive the menace of tyranny, if necessary, for years, if necessary, alone.
All right, so this is a really important part because you have to know what's going on at this particular moment and who's in the war and who's not in the war. Basically, France has fallen by this point. They had been taken over by the Germans very, very quickly, first part of the war. And the United States is really the only other option that Great Britain has, and we have not joined the war. So this is a worldwide message. It's on the radio, it's being transmitted everywhere across the world. Everyone's getting this, to include the US president, to include US generals. And he makes a point to say, if we have to, we will fight this battle, this war, alone. And he's trying to effectively shame the US military, the US generally, and the politicians that have refused to enter this war. They have refused to put their foot down and say, this is a bad guy. We have our values. We should stop him from doing what he's doing in respect to Hitler. And Churchill is at this moment saying, if we are going to have any morals, if we're going to have any values, it has to be centered on this is the moment that we have to put our foot down. And if we must do that, And if we must fight, then we will fight whether we have friends or we are on our own. And it makes no difference because we will fight. And he's trying to paint a picture of we are ready to fight for what we believe in. And what about you? Really kind of pushing the issue of the U.S. has chosen to stay out of this war, and this is something that has left the British people without a whole lot of options. All right, back to the clip.
At any rate, that is what we are going to try to do. That is the resolve of His Majesty's government, every man of them.
To your right a bit more, please.
That is the will of Parliament and the nation. The British Empire and the French Republic, linked together in their cause and in their need, will defend to the death their native soil, aiding each other like good comrades to the utmost of their strength. Even though large tracts of Europe and many old and famous states have fallen or may fall into the grip of the Gestapo and all the odious apparatus of the Nazi rule, we shall not flag or fail. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender!
All right, so what Churchill is trying to do here, he's trying to do a couple of things, and he's probably one of the best that could have ever been the one to deliver a speech like this. He is trying to link all of the hardship that the people are going through with a reason, a point, and some kind of a payoff at the end. This idea that if you fight and if you continue to persevere, that eventually good things will happen. We're never going to surrender. We're going to keep fighting until there's no more of us. This is something that Churchill was masterful about, and he looked at it and said, people need more than just something that says I'm successful or what's going on. Churchill understands that people need hope. Churchill understands that all of this is not going to come down to just military strength, but the will to fight. So World War II was going to see the British people really come out swinging with this particular concept. And eventually the United States does enter the war. We hook up with the British forces, and we have Operation D-Day, and we take the beaches of Normandy, rescuing France from the grip of Nazi Germany. And there are a couple of specific instances that we can see good generalship. For instance, George Patton. George Patton, he fights Rommel in that particular encounter. Rommel versus Patton, because he knows all of Rommel's moves, basically, he's able to plan and he's able to completely overrun Rommel. Rommel gets taken out or gets beaten back by Patton. We also see the invasion of Sicily, the island off the coast of Italy, the large island off the coast of Italy. The United States Air Force, well, not Air Force, the airborne infantry. They actually drop into Sicily and take it over. It's a base of operations for us to further invade into Italy. And that's going to be led by a combination force of General Eisenhower as well as General Patton. And then eventually the coup de grace is going to be D-Day. That's going to be where we really start to see the Allied forces kind of turn the tables. But what happened earlier on that gave the Allied powers the ability to do that? Well, Hitler had an agreement with Joseph Stalin, as you may remember from way back when. He had an agreement that basically split Poland. It said, hey, you guys keep that side, we'll keep this side, we'll be good. But he had every intention of attacking Stalin and taking all of Russia because he looked at the Slavic people as a lesser group. He looked at that racial group as something that was not really fit to rule, similar to how Kaiser Wilhelm II called them a servant race or a servant class. Hitler had a similar mindset. So there is a point where Hitler decides to invade Russia and break that truce and the old concept, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. At least in this context, Russia joins the Allied powers, and now Hitler is dealing with something that they tried to avoid in World War One, they tried to avoid in World War Two, and for whatever reason, they end up getting in the same mess: a war on two fronts, on two sides of their country. Uh, Russia is doing their thing. They're pushing up against the German borders. They have their own issues that they deal with. And ultimately, once you kind of see two massive militaries on either side have military success, it's kind of like a dam and a water level kind of rising. Eventually, the dam's going to break. And the Germans are holding everybody at bay. They're doing their fine. And then as soon as anything gives way, the entire military force crumbles. And that's what we basically see with the Allied invasion of France. When they retake France and they push the German forces back into Germany, there isn't much hope for the Germans at that point. It takes a while to get there, and it's not easy, but it's definitely something that is going to be the case. So, let's see here. Make sure we got all of the issues. Just making sure I have all my talking points. All right. So your question this week is, effectively, why did the Allies win, and was it simply luck, or was it good generalship, or what is that factor that kind of like gives them the victory? Well, as it relates to Europe, and very Europe specific with this, because we're not going to really talk about the Pacific here. What's going on? Well, the Allied forces, there are some luck there's some luck involved. First of all, they had to have Hitler make so many mistakes and his military make so many mistakes, and by that I mean attacking Russia at all. That was a big primary concern for the Allies, because with Russia being attacked, it gave Russia the reason to join the Allied powers and kind of be another thorn in the side of Hitler to give France and Great Britain a little bit of time to breathe. On top of that, military forces from the United States eventually do end up joining the fight, and they had been fresh for the last couple of years. And when they jump into the war, the United States was the freshest out of World War One, because they'd only really fought maybe 2 or so years in World War One out of the 4.5 years or so. In World War Two, they again had not fought for a couple of years, and they were fresher than everybody else. So the U.S. military was more effective than probably any other group, simply because they were more rested and they had less wear on the tires, kind of thing. On top of that, the resolve of the British people in the face of utter catastrophe and the Battle of Britain, where they're getting bombed in the city of London. Their homes are getting destroyed. Their massive structures are getting bombed. They're hiding in tunnels to weather the storm of war. It's hard to do. it's hard for a people to really keep the morale going, and for some reason, the British people were able to do that. Then you have the Operation D-Day, and where that's going to be where we see kind of the the military of the United States and the combined force of other countries to include Canada, Australia, Great Britain. Everybody kind of has a bone to pick in this fight, and they're going to invade France. And their entire thought process is we need to uh, reclaim France, get the people that were in charge of France back in power, so that we can have another ally. We can get everybody kind of on board, give them a reason to fight. So that's more or less what's going on. So why did they win? Well, um, it's for you to say which specific event or what specific thing you think led to the victory. But ultimately, the Allies are going to win just because they're able to win at the right times. They're going to have the right victories at the right times, and that's going to eventually lead to Germany collapsing and Hitler not surviving the encounter. All right, all right. That was a very very long presentation and video and whatnot. So, what I would like to do is I would like to just open it up for a few, maybe a minute or two. If you guys have any questions, um, feel free to throw them in chat, and I'll see if I can answer. I'll also throw it in. I'll throw that in chat as well. All right. So if you have any questions, throw it up in chat. I'll do my best to kind of field questions as I see them. If I see them in the next minute or so. Remember, I'm kind of on a delay. You see me about 30 seconds after I'm saying this right now. So give me a heads up. Let me know you're throwing out a question. If you would do me the favor, ask the question if you have one, and we'll get ready to go. Alrighty. If there are no questions, I would ask that you guys just give me a thumbs up or what have you if you guys are on your way out. Um, if you guys are gonna close up shop and we're done, just give me like a thumbs up or some kind of like smiley face emoji or something like that, just so I know that you guys are good and no questions or you're not typing or anything like that. So if you're all good to go ahead and throw like some kind of like thing in chat that's not crazy and let me know that you're good to go. That's pretty much where I'm at right now. So interesting. Got a thumbs up. I'll give you guys. Alrighty, cool. All right, if you guys have any questions about this, if you need any more assistance with anything, um, hit me up via email. Um, I also have Zoom tomorrow, normal times, and we'll be back ready to roll for next week. We only have 2 more weeks of online learning, really. We have next week, the week after, and technically there's a third week there. But we're going to be done with our core concepts after 2 weeks. Look at Canvas for information relating to next week. And we will see everybody in the not too distant future. All right, guys. Peace.